so that, you know, it's possible we will put this on a YouTube channel.
Right.
We are attempting to record this. We are recording this. Okay. So let me let everyone in who's in the chat room.
Hold on, I'm adding someone right now.
I just added all of the folks there. Sigurd, I'm going to, if, you know, Julie, if you could look and mute everybody except the candidates, Laura and myself, that would be very helpful. Just to make sure we're at minimum disruption. Now, do we have all the candidates? Okay, I see Valerie and Skyler. Laura, I see. Nora's iPhone. Nora, okay, Nora, you're there. You're kind of flipped, but that's okay. There we go. Excellent. Very good. Okay.
Hi, Laura.
Hello. How are you?
All right. So listen, we're gonna kind of hop right into this. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for being here this evening. I also want to say that I hope everyone's staying healthy and that your family and friends are healthy at this point and that we're all staying centered. For those of you who haven't been at a peer meeting before, I'd like to just let you know who peer is. Peer is Progressive East End Reformers. We are a progressive multi-issue grassroots organization committed to advocating for social, racial, environmental, and economic justice for all through electoral politics and activist issue-oriented engagements. PEER is a chapter of NYPAN, which is a statewide organization, New York Progressive Action Network, and we're affiliated with many organizations on Long Island and throughout the state. We work very closely with a number of our allies, including OLA, Sepa Mujer, East End Action Network, Long Island Activists, and others. So I want to just describe a little bit of the format so everybody kind of knows what will be happening this evening. We have a number of questions that the moderator, who is me, will be asking of all the candidates. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question. And Laura, raise your hand, Laura, if you would like, okay, is our timekeeper. So she's going to give us a 30-second warning. And is that going to be a quack, Laura?
Yes.
Okay, it's going to be like a duck quack on the phone, and then we'll have the final warning where she'll say time's up. So it's we're going to roll with it. It's going to be a little imperfect, but you know that's life, right? So we'll just do that. I see Arthur's ready to come in. All right, it's not a debate. It is a forum, so there's not going to be like crosstalk amongst the candidates. Just for everybody to know that we're just going to give them the opportunity to answer the questions themselves. And then after the moderated portion of the debate, we will allow people on the Zoom chat to ask questions. And you can, 2 ways. You can put a question in the chat box if you'd like. Julie's going to be moderating that. Or you can raise your hand at the end. The second way is we will have people who are watching via Facebook Live, if they want to ask questions, they can do so. All right, let us proceed. Any questions? Let me ask that.
I'm sorry, one second, it's Julie. I can't mute people's mics, so if everyone could just mute their mics, except for candidates, obviously, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, everybody hear that?
Catherine, my audio wasn't working in the very beginning. I'm wondering if you could just give a real quick, is there anything that I missed? It's Laura Ahearn.
Hi, Laura. If you heard what I just said, you've heard it all. I mean, but basically you'll have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question. Every candidate will have that. Did you hear that portion?
No, I didn't. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, 1.5 minutes. Laura Lever, who is waving right now, is going to give a 30-second warning. And then when your time is up, she will just shout out, time's up.
Okay, sounds good.
Any other questions from the candidates at this point?
I might just suggest that the candidates actually mute themselves until it's their turn, right? Because it's one at a time.
Certainly, that would be fine. That's fine.
Background noise is always an issue on these things.
Okay. All righty, so let's get started. Everybody be sure to mute yourselves. So first of all, welcome candidates. We're really thrilled that you are with us this evening. The first category of questions is about protecting the ballot. As we know, 5 states offer vote by mail, including Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. In light of the recent COVID-19 pandemic and yesterday's decision by the Supreme Court, should New York State implement vote by mail for June's primary? And would you support legislation that enabled this for future elections? So we're going to start with Laura and proceed from there.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Ahearn. I'm a social worker, an attorney, a mom, and I run the county's Crime Victim Center. So for about 30 years, I've dedicated myself and my life to protecting our most vulnerable. And I would absolutely be supportive of voting now for the primary. And in fact, we are encouraging folks when we talk to them, when we talk to voters, when we make contact over the phone, we're encouraging them to make requests for absentee ballots just in case. And I also would support legislation to ensure that that happens in the future. It's really important. It's not a democratic process. It's really important that everyone has a voice, and we want to make sure, especially now in light of COVID-19, that everybody has access to the ballot. So yes, I'd be very supportive.
Okay, thank you. Valerie? Valerie, can you hear me? Oh, you're muted probably.
Myself. Okay, I was unmuting myself, sorry. I think if we're doing a quick introduction, Valerie Cartright, I'm a councilwoman in the town of Brookhaven. I am currently in my 4th term, which is actually my 7th year. I am also a civil rights attorney and have been practicing for over 15 years. And I'm an adjunct instructor at St. Joseph's College teaching law and ethics. As it relates to the democratic process, I would absolutely support providing absentee ballots to all registered voters. I would go even further to say that the absentee ballots should be sent out with a prepaid postage, so it makes it easier for our voters to return those in the mail. I also would ask that they increase the locations where they can drop off the actual ballots, so that would expand the democratic process. I think it's important that we push our legislators to not only focus on the COVID, which is absolutely the most important thing right now, because that is public safety and it's our health, but we must make sure that we are protecting the democratic process as we go. Thank you.
Just a quick leap in here now, Valerie, would you support legislation that would actually allow for vote by mail? Not, this goes beyond the absentee ballot.
Oh yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Nora, can we hear from you next? There you are. Hi, Nora.
Hello, how are you all doing? So I've been a nurse at Stony Brook Hospital for 32 years, and in light of what's going on now, we don't know where the end is. We've certainly seen the beginning, and it's frightening out there. So we definitely need an alternative way for in-person voting, and I would definitely support legislation that would allow the voting by mail. And I thank you all for your consideration of having me here today. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Nora. Skyler Johnson.
Hi, I'm Skyler Johnson, running for New York State Senate. I just want to thank everyone for coming. We're in trying times, and I really appreciate everyone taking the watch this. When it comes to the question, I would absolutely support voting by mail. Honestly, it's very sad that we don't have that already. The truth is that even without the virus, people across the country are afraid to go to the polls because we see rampant voter suppression throughout this country. If we put voting by mail in place, it would allow people to have their voices heard without actually having to physically come to a spot. There's a lot of people who cannot come to the polls because they're not accessible, because the amount of locations where you can vote is not great enough. So doing this would change the tide. If we're doing this, I want to make sure that, like I said, it's permanent and that we have oversight on the process to make sure that it's not tampered with. So I would absolutely support voting by mail, and I would also support making sure that everyone is automatically registered in this. If we pass a voting by mail law as a permanent measure, what we would see our legislators come in and try to make it so that way you needed to opt into it. What I would want to do is make it so that way everyone was immediately opted into it to make sure that we have the greatest voting tool possible. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Okay, now Tommy John Schiavoni, please.
Good evening, everyone, and I want to thank Pierre for having us here tonight and keeping our democratic process moving forward. It's important that as a society we do our customs and the things that we need to do to choose our leaders. I'm a councilman in Southampton Town and a retired teacher of 32 years. In addition to that, I am also a former village trustee, a school board member, fire department member, and member of SD1 my entire life. Now, to the question, I would support anything that increases democracy. I believe that in New York, every citizen in the state of New York should be registered on the day of their birth. If they've got a social security card, they should be registered to vote, no questions. And as far as this particular primary on June 23rd, this is going to be a challenge. I believe in mail-in voting. And in addition to that, I would support legislation that would allow for no excuse absentee ballots in New York State. The more people that we have engaged in our democracy, the better off we are.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Tommy John. Okay, thank you all for that. The next questions are about income inequality and wealth insecurity. New York has always had a tremendous wealth inequality equation at work, and especially on the, within our district. In light of the current crises that we face, would you support a wealth tax or other measures to help narrow the disparity in wealth within our population? And what would that look like for you? So we're going to start. Would you like me to repeat that? Would you like me to raise your hand if you want me to repeat that? You're all good with that. Okay, excellent. Yeah. Valerie, we're going to start with you.
I absolutely would support wealth tax. I think that it's important that we take whatever measures are necessary within the state and, to be quite honest, within the country, to make sure that we are providing for the most vulnerable, providing for those that are struggling the most economically. And I think that it's important that we look at certain mechanisms to put in place to tax the wealthy. There were a few pieces of legislation, which I don't have in front of me, that were proposing wealth tax before the New York State Senate and the Assembly, and I would support those wholeheartedly. I think that we have to recognize that we need to equalize not only economics within the state of New York and our country, but deal with healthcare equality and criminal justice reform and look at leveling the playing field throughout the entire state and throughout the country. And we should definitely be starting that with taxation, in addition to other reform.
Okay, great. So we'll go to Nora next.
Hello. So for years, people have been kind of laughing at my Pollyanna view of life. And I've been suggesting that we should have a flat tax. 30% out of everybody's paycheck going to the state and the federal who are in the middle class is quite consuming to your ability to keep your nose above water. And so my recommendation is to look to create a flat tax whereby we would increase the contribution from the wealthy and decrease the contribution from the middle class. And again, my thoughts were, if everybody paid 7%, and I've talked to some of the experts and they said it would actually even be lower, something more akin to 3 to 4% of the tax of your overall salary going to the tax. So that's the problem. We need to definitely decrease the middle class, and everybody's getting a big chunk taken out of their check. So we really need to minimize that and focus more equalized, so that one person can say, I've had 30% taken out of my overall income, and someone else can be wealthy and say, oh, well, I only had 1% taken out, and it just needs to be leveled off.
Okay, thank you. Skyler Johnson, you're up next.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So too often we see the idea of lowering taxes as a very empty promise in the campaign process. We see a lot of politicians come in and promise to lower taxes, but they never say how they're going to do it. If we continue with the type of taxation that we have, people are not going to survive. I'm a college student, and right now I'm seeing a lot of people my age and people of all generations leaving New York because they cannot afford it here. We need to create a wealth tax to make sure that the people who can afford it are paying into our system, because when they do that, everyone benefits. Because what we need to make sure is that with this wealth tax, we're creating new programs that will benefit the entire state. That means creating better housing programs to make sure that people aren't forced into economic exile out of the state because the houses are too expensive here. It means paying into education, so that way both for public education, where we have a lot of kids who are in really disparate conditions, and then both college, where people are not able to afford to go because of their economic situation. If we tax the wealthy, we will be able to pay for these programs. We'll be able to pay for healthcare. We will make sure that no one is forced to leave the island because of economic conditions. Wealth tax is the only way to go right now, and it's really time that we enact that in New York and in the federal government.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Tommy John.
Thank you for the question. New York State has an inordinate amount of millionaires. We do well in that department, and we also do well in education. I support a wealth tax in New York State, including a pied-à-terre tax as well. I believe that these monies should go into augmenting our educational system to give people the tools to develop themselves, to develop the talent to bring New York State into the future. That's what I think that this money should be specifically aimed for, is to equalize our schools throughout the state of New York and to guarantee real equity in education as per the New York State Constitution.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. All right. So I'm just going to turn the light on in here.
I like your background, by the way.
Okay, thank you. It's one of my many photographs. Okay, so thanks for that. Just a couple of questions. You're all in favor of a wealth tax. That's great. We're going to have to be creative, I think, in taxing coming into the new season.
Ms. Ahearn.
Catherine, I didn't answer the question.
Oh, Laura, I'm sorry. I apologize for
Thanks,
that.
Tommy
So,
John.
I'm trying to keep track of everybody here, but we're going to have to be creative. Laura, please let us know your plan.
Sure. In the United States, the income gap between the rich and everyone else has been growing for more than 30 years. And men make up an overwhelming majority of top earners across the United States, even though women now represent almost half of the country's workforce. So racial discrimination in many forms, including education, hiring, and pay practices, contributes to the earning gaps. In the last quarter of 19, the median white worker made 28% more than the typical Black worker, and 35 more than, actually 35 more than the median Latino worker. So another factor that's widening this income divide is the decline of US labor unions. So as the share of the workforce represented by a union declined to less than 11% since their peak in the 40s and 50s, those at the top of the income scale have increased their power to rig economic rules in their favor, further increasing economic equality. So I would absolutely be supportive of a wealth tax. As Tommy John said, there are inordinate amount of millionaires. I'd support a pied-à-terre tax and a modest stock transfer tax. And for that money to be funneled to Medicaid to cover the Medicaid gap we're facing, and also education.
Great. Okay, super. Thank you, Laura, and my apologies.
No problem.
Okay, so the next question is about the rights of indigenous peoples in New York State to protect their sacred lands. As many of you know, New York is one of only 5 states without a law prohibiting the disturbance of sacred indigenous lands on private property. This has led to building on burial grounds of the Shinnecock Nation's ancestors and other nations throughout New York. Would you support the Senate Bill 4422, sponsored by Leroy Comrie from Queens, the Unmarked Burial Sites Protection Act? And just parenthetically, there is also an assembly bill which was introduced in 2009, of which Fred Thiel is a co-sponsor, but that's never actually been voted on. So I like to hear your positions on that, and we will start with Nora.
Thank you. Yeah, I do support that. It, you know, life is precious and death is precious, and people need to be able to honor both the living and the dead, and to have a place to do so. And apparently that land was theirs a long time ago, and we really should not be infringing on what was their historical lands. And I would definitely be very much in support of protecting that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora. Skyler.
Thank you. I'm really happy to hear this question. I consider myself a friend and ally to the Shinnecock Nation. I was very proud to stand in support with them along the property on Montauk Highway, which was being dug up for new construction. They knew it was a sacred site for burial. They knew there were artifacts buried there, and no one was stopping them from building on it for months. I then went and testified in front of the Southampton Town Board to help make sure that the Shinnecock Nation had the injunction put on the land so that way no one would ever build there again. It's really upsetting that we're one of the only states to not have this legislation in place already. So I want to make sure that I'm standing with the Shinnecock in Albany and that we're passing this bill so that way this doesn't need to happen again. I'd also go further to make sure that we're working with the Shinnecock and treating them as equal partners for the first time in New York State. They've seen a series of injustices. The billboard right on the highway that's on their sacred land, they had the right to build that, and they were oppressed by all the elected officials at the time. If I'm elected, I'm going to make sure that we're fighting for their rights as a sovereign nation and that they are not oppressed anymore. We can start a new chapter in New York State's history and a new chapter in the Shinnecock's history. I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Tommy John.
Thank you for the question. In Senate District 1, we actually have two reservations. We have the Poospatuck Reservation to the west, as well as the Shinnecock Reservation in my town that has certainly been in the news. And I'm proud to say that we are instituting a building moratorium in the area of the Shinnecock Nation in Shinnecock Hills and Sugarloaf. And we are going to be, if we have votes, I will be voting yes on this. I was at that meeting and I did express my support. We have the Archaeological Graves Act where we are going to require that there is an archaeological survey of all building in the area of Tuckahoe and Shinnecock Hills. I think it's important to say that the town of Southampton has spent over $25 million preserving land in that area itself. In fact, last summer, when human remains were found, we swung into action and purchased the property and sterilized the property and made sure that that property is going to be there in perpetuity. I would support such a bill in New York State, absolutely, not just for the Shinnecock, not just for the Poospatuck, but also for the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Oneida, the Mohawk, and the Onondaga in upstate New York, who all have reservations on these areas and have sacred lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy John. Just, parenthetically, while the town board is, kind of springing into action, the nation has been before the board for a decade trying to get the legislation passed without success. So this is something that I just wanted to put out there.
And I'm glad that this board is amicable to their request and that we've been working with the Shinnecock in many different ways.
Thank you. Laura Ahearn. Where's Laura? There you are.
Thank you, Catherine. So yeah, I would absolutely be supportive of protecting those sacred burial grounds and sites. And it's really an embarrassment to me as a New Yorker that we are only one of just a handful of states that haven't already done that. But that's, I think, reflective of Albany and where Albany has been under a lot of the Republican rule in the New York State Senate. So we've seen resistance with moving a lot of really great legislation to protect our most vulnerable. And I did look into this bill. I had spoken to a few really nice folks the other day about this. And I did speak with the supervisor about why, the town supervisor of Southampton, about why there's this delay. And I think I have 25 years experience on a town, county, state, and federal level of writing and advocating for the passage of legislation. And it requires certain nuances to get past certain individuals that might be obstacles. So I think that maybe some of the obstacles are across New York State, but not necessarily down here, because I know Assemblyman Thiel has been pushing for this legislation. So I think the objective would be to work with and sit at the table with stakeholders upstate New York. And my husband and I actually have some property upstate, and I recognize some of those reservations that Tommy John mentioned. And we spend quite a bit of time up there as well. And I do believe that my relationships that already exist can help to move that legislation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. Valerie, please. You need to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. I absolutely would support that legislation. Actually had a conversation with Chief Wallace most recently, and have spoken to Lance Gumbs over the past few weeks related to this legislation. I was in shock to hear that they've been trying to push this forward for quite some time with no resolution. Assemblyman Engelbright, who is my assembly person in my area, is a sponsor of the bill, particularly Bill A05928. And I thought that in my mind, it was a no-brainer. Why, I don't know why we would not have passed it, but I do understand that there's some impediments, some of the pushback probably coming from developers. Being an elected official on a local level, I've had to work closely with developers on land use rights and things of that nature. So understand that there needs to be a balance. But with this particular situation, that legislation should have been passed over a decade ago, and I definitely would support that. I also would support the creation of a task force and having an official liaison. One of the things that I was also shocked about was the fact that the Native Americans do not have an official body that speaks on their behalf and protects their interests when speaking to the different levels of government. I have, representing Setauket for the past 7 years. We all know that there's a rich Native American history in Setauket, have experience dealing with archaeological digs. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Valerie. And Valerie, you're going to be up first for this next question, so I'm just putting you, so don't mute yourself.
Okay.
All right. So the next topic we're going to dive into is healthcare and the New York Health Act. So the first question, there's going to be a couple within this category. The first question is, will you agree to co-sponsor Senator Rivera's bills 4840, the New York Health Act, as it is on day one? If not, why not? And if yes, will you take an active role in educating the public and on the act, and will you add it to your website if it's not already there? So Valerie, we're going to start with you.
Yes, I would be, I believe, the 32nd sponsor. Also, I would definitely put it on my website. I do have on my website that I support single payer healthcare. I'm not sure if I actually identified New York Health Act, but if I do not, I will be more than happy to include that on my campaign website. And education, absolutely. I think that some of the problems that we come across as legislators is not having the opportunity to speak to the community and brief them and let them know about not only our future plans, but proposed legislation that may be on the table or legislation that actually exists. Education is key, and I would be at the forefront of making sure that we educate our communities of the components of the New York Health Act.
So just as a follow-up to that, Valerie, would you hold a town hall on the New York Health Act if you were our senator?
Absolutely, and I would push to make sure that not only I host a town hall, that other organizations that are advocates of the New York Health Act do that, so we can reach as broad of a base as possible. As with the criminal justice reform and the bail reform bill, I work with the New York Civil Liberties Union, as well as Amistad Long Island Black Bar Association, to host educational forums such as this, because it's very important.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to explain, as many of you on the Zoom probably know, we had some disappointment in the last session with Long Island senators who ran on supporting the New York Health Act and then did not support it once they were in office. That's one. And two, it's a big issue for Pierre. We've held 2 public forums over the last several years. to try to help educate the public, and education seems to be a huge and important aspect of it. So Laura Ahearn, please, do you support it? And if not, why not?
There we go. Catherine, I'm not so sure about New York Health Act, especially after the governor has informed us that 95% of New Yorkers have insurance coverage. So I would want to keep the responsibility for healthcare at a federal level, because if we start changing our rules here in New York State, then that might put additional burdens on the local businesses that we have, where other individuals from other states might want to come here. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say I'm not sure. So for me, I would like to really focus a lot of my attention on the Medicaid cuts and how the governor in our $177 billion budget cut Medicaid. And I mean, I was really stunned by that cut. I understand we have to be a little pragmatic, and especially now with Corona, we have changed many of our priorities, or Corona has forced us to. But the governor mentioned a Medicaid redesign team that convened and came up with cost savings, and some of those cost savings were characterized as waste and fraud and mismanagement. I would really like to spend some time working on Medicaid. And again, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to not support New York Health Act. I'm going to say for now I'm undecided.
Okay, thank you. Tommy John.
Well, first of all, 5% of people in New York State uninsured is unacceptable, particularly in this day and age with COVID-19, that we have 5% of our population who will go nowhere near a doctor's office or a hospital. Frankly, it's dangerous for them and their family and for the rest of us. So I think that New York is doing a much better job with their health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, and I support the Affordable Care Act, and here is why. In other words, on day one, I would not be voting yes on the New York Health Act, and it's because New York State at this time with this pandemic, frankly, cannot afford it. Each year, New York pays over $26 billion more to the federal government than it gets back in taxes. I do believe in it. I do believe in single payer health care. I believe that it needs to come from the federal government. And frankly put, New York State cannot provide health insurance for everybody in the state, collapsing 9% of our industry, as well as supplying health care for Tennessee, Kentucky, and Louisiana. New York is a donor state. Money is flying out of New York State. And if we were to bring some of that money back, we could probably afford this. But as it stands now, we can't. I believe we need to do a better job with Medicaid. I believe that every person in New York State should have Medicare, should have health care. If they cannot afford it through our exchanges, then it should be provided to them from the state. Was that my time?
It's your time. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tommy John. Okay, next we'll hear from Skyler, please.
Great. I'm really glad that this question came up because this is something I'm particularly passionate about. As been said, 5% of New Yorkers without healthcare is nearly 1 million people in New York without healthcare. The rest of those people are tied down to their insurance and aren't necessarily receiving quality insurance. We're in a period of time where it's not just the people without healthcare that are questioning how they're going to afford their expenses with COVID. It's the people with healthcare that are worried they're going to get sick because their premiums and deductibles are too high. I would vote to pass the New York Health Act on day one. Part of the thing that I need to mention here, it's not like if we pass New York Health Act on day one, it actually goes into effect on day one. I'm endorsed by Long Island activists, which one of its biggest missions is to get New York Health Act passed. I was in a session with them with Assemblyman Richard Gottfried, who's the Assembly co-author of the bill, and I asked him this question, how long he thought it would take to actually enact, and he said it could take upwards of 5 years to get into place. That means 5 more years without health care for over 1 million people in New York, and with a whole bunch of people who are stuck who are stuck with insurance tied to their jobs, especially in a period of time where people are losing the jobs as a we need to make sure that we pass this bill immediately. We can afford the bill. I've actually sat down with the numbers for this bill. It builds on top of the existing infrastructure. We're not trying to pull this money out of nowhere. We already have people on Medicare, Medicaid. We have people who are already paying into the system. And this would make sure that we take that and we incorporate it so that way no one ever dies from healthcare expenses. This is the most important thing we can do. And I will vote to pass it on day one. Thank you.
Thank you, Skyler. Nora, you were there. Please.
Yep, still here. So I agree with this bill. I would act to pass the bill on day one, knowing that we would probably need to make some amendments along the way, because when we think we have it all put together, we always find, potholes along the way that we need to amend and fix. Again, we would need to be educating the public. A lot of people, just for fear of letting go of what's comfortable, their comfort zone for what they've done for all their life, it really rattles them. And to educate them about what it would be, what it would offer, would, I think, enhance the acceptability of it. And again, town halls are a great idea. Bringing together people, whether it's by a Zoom meeting, town hall, because we, again, don't know where we'll be, if we'll be allowed to socialize more freely down the road. Again, education is key. One of the things, ooh, there goes my duck. I'll talk later.
Yeah, Nora, you do have 30 more seconds. And you muted yourself.
And I'm wasting time. One of the other things I did not mention, I've been teaching as a clinical nurse instructor at the School of Nursing for 20 years at Stony Brook. And I really love educating people. Even my co-workers, they're like, you're such a natural in teaching. And I really feel, I try not to overtalk to confuse people. So I'm sorry if I'm not impressing anybody with how wordy I am. But I try to get right to the point and try to make the points clear. So again, that would be something I'd be interested in. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a follow-up question for the three who stated that they would support the New York Health Act on day one. And Nora, we're going to start with you. So the follow-up question is this. Are there elements of the New York Health Act that cause you concern? For instance, do you envision a role for private insurance alongside the New York Health Act? Or how would the New York Health Act affect individuals whose retirement plans include private insurance and which were negotiated in good faith?
Would you just repeat the first part of the question again?
So the question is whether or not there are any aspects of the New York Health Act that that you might be concerned with. Yeah. For instance, do you envision a role for private insurance alongside the act? What about individuals that have retirement plans with private insurance companies that were negotiated in good faith? Where would they stand?
So again, I think part of the problem of the escalating costs have been because the private insurances have, whittled their way into pretty much every aspect of every workplace. And so again, that would be something that, we would need to, if they attempted to do so, to amend and I would say, to really keep them out of trying to be part of it. And also make an amendment for the retirement insurance so that, people will have an acceptable ability to have coverage, but not actually be losing out so much from what was previously negotiated.
Okay, Skyler, you're next.
Great. So I've been very thorough with my research into New York Health Act. So first of all, when it comes to private insurance, the only thing I would want to see private insurance playing a role in is when the New York Health Act didn't cover something. That's something that's a lot of times brought up in the federal plan for Medicare for All, that private insurance would only be allowed to sell plans if something wasn't covered, which is very rare under New York Health Act. So I would not have an option in there because that could collapse the entire system. It's another thing I actually spoke to Richard Gottfried about, Assemblyman Gottfried. I discussed the the idea of a public option. And what he was discussing is that if you do that, the people who need it the most will go into the plan. The people who aren't using it will stick with their private insurance. It would cause the entire system to collapse. So we cannot do that. So no, I would not keep insurance in the mix, except for when New York Health Act doesn't cover something. When it comes to retirement plans, first of all, I do want to point out that passing New York Health Act would actually give workers more bargaining power, because if you remove healthcare from the table, not just in retirement, but from all employment decisions, it opens up power for both unions and general workers to negotiate for other aspects of their employment. So that's something that's really important to recognize. We're also, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to protect the future of New York. By passing this bill, we would make sure that no one in New York ever needs to worry about negotiating healthcare into their retirement package. So then they have room to negotiate other things that are just as important without worrying about where they're going to get their healthcare from. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Skyler. And Valerie, please.
Okay. So as it relates to the agreements that are already in place with respect to retirement and collective bargaining agreements, I think that I agree with Skyler as it relates to creating more bargaining power. I don't think that, I believe healthcare is a human right. We should not be negotiating that as part of an employment benefit. So I agree on that. However, as it relates to private insurance companies, I think there may be room for a carve out. I can't speak to you directly as to how that would work. I would, of course, come in day one voting for the New York Health Act, but be willing to sit and discuss how we could potentially create a carve out for private insurance companies in certain instances, given the ramifications that were already stated by some of my other opponents related to eliminating in totality private insurance companies. So when we deal with legislation, we're always dealing with the possibility of having to amend, look at, see if it's working, if it's actually achieving the objective that we thought it would. And this is one of those situations where I would entertain discussion with respect to a carve out.
Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. So we're going to move on to the next topic, which is affordable housing. And Laura, we're going to start with you. In light of the recent reporting from Newsday on redlining practices, how can the state counteract housing discrimination on Long Island and also specifically on the East End? So Laura, you're muted.
Thank you, Catherine. That was a deeply disturbing report from Newsday, but reflective of a lot that is going on under the surface. And I think that it's really important for us to make investments in enforcement. And I think what ends up happening is folks put into place what they believe are training programs that are going to, or that have hopes of making a difference. But then what happens is those programs are put into place, but then folks are not following up to evaluate their effectiveness. So, I have 25 years experience developing, implementing, evaluating the efficacy of problem-solving community-based programs that are aimed at a specific issue or resolving a specific issue in the community. And I think the answer to this is holding them accountable. We saw on the video some of those training programs, and they were making a mockery out of what they had to do to comply with the law. So if we were to make some type of an investment or require maybe realtors to make contributions yearly, and for that to go to a certain fund, and then that fund be used for enforcement purposes, to continue to check in on these realtors, but not to just hope that it's going to affect a change by having those training programs and having rules and regulations in place. Not enough to pass legislation and to put into place policies and regulations. You have to follow up on them with enforcement.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. So Tommy John, we'll go to you next.
Thank you for the question. Affordable housing on Long Island, it's one of our greatest challenges here. We have a very strong market all over the island driving the price of housing up. especially out here on the East End. For me, it's going to be a number of different programs to get people into real places where they can live. I personally support the 0.5% transfer tax that was put into legislation last year. It was vetoed by the governor. We're going to pass that thing again. And then it'll go up to a public referendum in the individual towns. And with that 0.5%, we can make those dollars go a long way. You see, for me, it's a number of different projects. It's infill in our main streets, mixed use, near transportation centers, in addition to the transfer tax, which would create a kind of a revolving housing fund where first-time home buyers can borrow from the fund as well as get their own mortgages and purchase housing. The goal here is to have people, young people, purchasing their own homes so that they can stay in the community, invest in the community, live in the community, have children in the community, and promote good, clean, healthy communities that we have. We need people to stay here on Long Island, and there's a number of different things, but those are two.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. And
You're welcome.
so next we're going to have Skyler, and also the question is about how to counteract the housing discrimination as well as provide more affordable housing. Skyler, please.
So it's interesting because when the Newsday report came out, of course, everyone was deeply disturbed, but a lot of people were shocked. I was not shocked. These policies of redlining have been in place since the New Deal. We've seen people intentionally drawing lines around minority communities to prevent them from ever advancing, and that is still present today. Now, it's not enough to say, okay, let's go and retrain these people, or let's go and try to enforce these laws. This is systemic racism. It's built into our system, and we need to start to work that out. So one thing we need to do is make sure that education is properly funded. I spoke about this at another forum. We need to stop taxing for schools based on a flat property tax, and we need to move to a tiered general tax across New York State. Because right now your quality of education depends on your zip code, and your zip code depends on how much money you have. I can tell you that I've seen schools that have pretty much zero funding and whose teachers are underpaid by tremendous amounts, bordering to schools where the teachers are able to make the salaries that they deserve. And I don't think that that's fair. We need to make sure that all teachers are able to make the salaries that they deserve, and that all schools are able to receive the funding that belongs to them. There's a lot of policies that really go in place here. I have comprehensive housing policies that involve using the homes throughout New York State that are already there to make sure that we're getting people in. But when it comes to racism, this is the first step. We need to make sure that our education is quality. We need to make sure that we're working on policies that will benefit New York State, and then we're not just relying on the realtors. Because Laura's right, they're not going to follow them. But in the end, it's not just about enforcement. They're going to find ways around it. There's a lot of racism here, and the only way to fight it is through comprehensive policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Skyler. So Nora, please, if you could answer next.
Surely. So I have 4 children, ages 22 to 27, and the affordable housing in their eyes and in the eyes of many people on Long Island does not exist. And, as far as just being discriminatory and trying to ward off different neighborhoods for certain people and such of this nature, this stuff really needs to stop. And I believe, is there an answer to the affordable housing? Clearly not yet. So this, is going to take, multiple people coming together at the tables for the entire state and here for Long Island to determine how best we can actually solve this problem, because nobody's come up with the answer. People have, they're all talk and no action, and we really need some action on this so that we can retain our own families here on the island, here in New York, and that we can prosper in the process.
Thank you, Nora. So Valerie, please.
Thanks. As a civil rights attorney, I've spent years working with housing advocacy organizations, as well as organizations such as Erase Racism, fighting against housing discrimination. At times, the only way to change the way things are happening within our counties and within our state is to bring lawsuits. And we've forced the hand of the state on a number of occasions with respect to discrimination laws. But in addition, New York has taken steps in the right direction. For example, banning discrimination based on non-wage income is something that was a step in the right direction. But we need to continue to create laws that are more restrictive with respect to discrimination, as well as create opportunities for more enforcement. Legislation without enforcement might as well not have the legislation at all in place. I think that with this article that came out most recently, it shed some light on the specific detail of the problem, but the problem has existed for quite some time. Affordable housing is something that I have been an advocate of, and not only in my district, but within the town of Brookhaven since I've been in office. I think it's important that we need to create additional incentives for developers and create a change in the way that people think about affordable housing, because without community support, it is almost impossible to get that through the town and local legislative bodies.
Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. So the next question on housing, and some of you've already touched on it, so we're going to have like a 60-second response or less. Will you support Assemblyman Thiel's bill implementing a 0.5 or 0.5% transfer tax to create a fund for affordable housing? So if you could just let us know if you would support that, or if there's any other creative legislation ideas that you might have. And we'll start with Tommy John.
Yes. I spoke about that earlier, and I just want to say that I kind of flipped the two around, that the Newsday article that came out last year was truly disturbing. And it was a really they put a lot of time into it, and I'm glad that they opened it up to the public to show what is going on Long Island and has been going on Long Island since the urban sprawl. And this is a mindset that we have to get out of here on Long Island. And I believe that creating these affordable housing opportunities in our main street is going to be key to solving this. I absolutely support Assemblyman Thiel's bill for the transfer tax. It's going to give towns tools that we need, because it's really, really difficult to provide affordable housing with the prices where they are. And I'm proud to say that in Southampton town, over the past couple of years, we've provided over 50 new affordable housing units. My student's in one of them. She loves it. It's $1,300, 2 rooms. She's a nurse. God bless her. And you too, Nora. So she's here in our community working, and we need to do more of that.
Great. Thank you, Tommy John. Skyler, please.
Great. So yes, I would support this bill to create the tax. However, that does not go nearly far enough. So I have a plan that was actually created after I spoke to some housing experts. So we have over 100,000 vacant homes throughout New York State. We have a problem in Brookhaven where we'll see a lot of vacant homes throughout the entire town, and we'll see elected officials taking selfies in front of these homes. And I think that it's disgraceful, because what I've heard, I heard at a meeting where one of the elected officials actually was speaking about the homelessness crisis. We were discussing the amount of people who could not afford homes throughout Brookhaven and throughout New York, and then they immediately went and took a picture in front of one of these vacant homes and how happy they were that they were being torn down. What my plan does, it actually gets these vacant homes into the hands of people, for both people that are homeless and people that are leaving New York because they cannot afford the taxes here, because they cannot afford the cost of a home. So this plan is actually developed so that way under this they would be paying into taxes. However, it would be done on a sliding scale. This is also done by not using the term affordable housing, because right now, if you use the term affordable housing, you need to fall under HUD guidelines, and affordable housing only allows you to charge a certain amount and you need to cap it at a certain income level, which isn't reasonable for New York. A family of 4 making $87,000 in Alabama might be acceptable. A family of 4 making $87,000 in Southampton is a recipe for someone leaving. So my plan would make sure that we actually get these homes into the hands of people. It would benefit everyone. It would make sure that we're actually taking care of these homes and that we're giving people a safe place to live. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Skyler. Nora.
Yes, I would vote for Assemblyman Thiel's bill. I believe that we need to begin and really make a difference in trying to make this change. Again, it's near and dear to my heart, you know, not only my children, but the students that I teach as well. You know, when I ask, what are your plans after graduation? And unanimously, the answers are getting the out of New York. And, you know, it's just so sad that it's not even a consideration for them because it's just an impossible dream. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nora. Valerie.
Well, first, I must state for the record, I am not one of those elected officials in the town of Brookhaven that takes selfies in front of the vacant homes that are being torn down. I make it a point not to in any way highlight that in a way that anyone could consider it to be celebratory. The reality of the situation is that we are in a position where we have a lot of dangerous homes in our communities that unfortunately we have to take down to protect the interests of other people in the neighborhood and to protect kids that might be, you know, breaking into the home. So from a public health and a safety perspective, I have voted a number of times to demolish certain homes that are vacant. But Skyler is absolutely right. We should not be demolishing homes. It shouldn't even get to this point. We should be having our higher elected officials and our higher governmental bodies investing in rehabbing these homes before they get to this point. The town of Brookhaven has called on that from the state on numerous occasions, and that unfortunately has not occurred. But as far as the tax is concerned, I most definitely support Assemblyman Thiel's bill and truly believe that the way to start to get to where we need to be is to distribute wealth. And that is one of the ways to do that. It's to redistribute wealth. Thank you.
Okay, great, great. Thank you, Valerie. Laura, please, Laura Ahearn.
Thanks, Catherine. We absolutely need affordable workforce housing. Both of my children actually struggle. One has had to move upstate New York, and one is a Navy veteran. She and her husband are both Navy veterans, and they struggle going back and forth between Long Island and Virginia. So I would absolutely be supportive of Assemblyman Thiel's legislation. But also, you know, we should really focus a little more of our attention on transit-based housing, like the Ronkonkoma Hub. That gives young families affordable housing. Commuters can walk to the station. We have residential buildings, commercial space, so many housing options and business opportunities, and it's just creating thousands of construction jobs, and it really stimulates the economy. So it enhances the quality of life and it provides affordable workforce housing. So I would definitely be supportive of Assemblyman Thiel's transfer tax, and also I would want to look at a little bit more of transit-based housing.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Laura. So the next question around housing is also about the campaign, the general election campaign. When it comes to young people, housing issues are really not a red or a blue issue. It's important to people across the political spectrum. So in our Senate district, which has been, had a Republican representing us for 40 plus years, how can you use the housing issue to bring independents and moderate Republicans to support you? And we'll start with Skyler.
So I'm really happy about this question because you're right. We see across the board for both young people and people of all ages that this isn't about Democrat versus Republican. People are worried about where they're going to live and if they're going to have a roof over their head tomorrow. Like Nora said earlier, I see a lot of young people who are getting ready to leave the island as soon as they graduate. I had a friend who was working 60-hour weeks while attending school full time to try to afford the cost of tuition as well as actually having a place to live. I've met people who were staying in abusive relationships so that way they actually had a place to live. That's unacceptable. So my housing plan appeals to a lot of people because it makes sense to people. Something that I pride myself on is being able to break down issues for people who aren't necessarily as politically engaged and who haven't necessarily haven't necessarily read the Long Island Divided article. I like being able to discuss with people who are just getting introduced to politics. So when it comes to this home issue, this will really, like you said, appeal to people across the board. My plan, especially, I see a lot of people out in, again, Brookhaven, who are living on blocks with a lot of vacant homes, and it's driving down their own property value. So they're very frustrated. I met a couple who wasn't able to sell their home when they tried because there was 4 vacant homes in their neighborhood and people stopped looking in their area. So doing this would really appeal to people because the people living in these areas that have a number of vacant homes, we would be able to take care of that. We'd be able to get people into those homes. It would make the neighborhood a lot nicer because you wouldn't see overrun homes that are falling apart. And it would really benefit everyone. So my plan will really appeal to both Democrats and Republicans.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Nora, you're next.
Okay. So I'm letting you get to know me little by little. One of the other things that I do for New York State Public Employees Federation is that I'm the regional coordinator for Long Island. So I have a good relationship with our Assembly and our Senate currently, having had them in for interviews and things like that over the years. I think they know where my heart is, that my heart is trying to make things better for all people, not just certain people who, are under a R or a D or somewhere in the middle. I definitely feel like I can walk the aisle to bring forth good change. And again, it's not really a hard sell when we're all talking about preserving Long Island. If only, a handful of people of certain salaries can stay here, there's really not going to be much for them to represent. So they need to protect and keep who we have and attract even more.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora. Valerie, please, you're next.
So most issues, in my opinion, most issues of local government are not issues of Democrat or Republican. I am the only Democrat on a town board of 7 and have been successful in pushing forward various pieces of legislation and having it passed unanimously. Why? Because of the fact that when people understand that the issues affect them, and it has nothing to do with their Democratic or Republican or any other party affiliation, and that the issues that we're addressing will have a direct impact on their parents, their grandparents, their children, then generally they're open to discussion. When we start to deal with engaging the millennials and engaging the younger people, this is actually one of the key issues to be able to bring them in, because they want to stay on Long Island, but they can't afford to stay on Long Island. So offering them options and offering them a voice to be able to have a discussion and say, well, these are my thoughts, goes a long way. There's a group called Minority Millennials that's been working with the Suffolk County Legislature over the past 2 years or so to advocate for affordable housing options, and even talk to the legislature about using the student loan debt as part of the mortgage financing, because many times when you come out of school, you may not qualify for a mortgage based on your school debt. That unfortunately did not go as far as it should have with the Suffolk County Legislature, but these are the things that we need to be dealing with on a state level, making sure that we are eliminating the impediments to having young people not only afford to live on Long Island, but to have people allow their grandparents and their parents to have an affordable place to live when they choose to no longer have to take care of their own residential home.
That's a good point. Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. So Laura, please, you would be next.
Sure. This time I did not mute my mic. I hope I didn't interfere with anybody else. So this district, you're right. It's a district that's broken up R's and D's, but it also has blanks and indies. So it's about a third, and a third. So I think I have to agree with a lot of the other candidates that this is not a Democrat or a Republican issue. However, when you're working with transit-based housing, you're now going to start out with REBNY, right? The Real Estate Board of New York. You're going to start out with the real estate folks, then you're going to have the construction companies coming in, And then after construction is complete, you're going to have commercial space being rented. It's going to stimulate business. Now also you're going to have residential housing, so workforce housing, affordable workforce housing. So I don't think boosting the economy is a Democrat or Republican issue, but I can add that was that a quack?
You have 30 more seconds.
Oh, that's the 30-second one. Okay, because it took the screen and I thought, oh, I'm out of time. What I could say is I'm really well known in this district as being a moderate Democrat. So I think that because of my characterization as being moderate, it's because of my positions on Megan's Law and protecting our most vulnerable. But I'm also an individual who runs a not-for-profit organization that has been working with our most vulnerable for 25 years to help protect them, to help domestic violence victims, sexual assault victims access services, and help the undocumented access. So again, it's not a Dem or Republican issue. It's more of an issue of quality of life and also being able to attract other individuals from other parties.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Okay, and please, Tommy John.
Thank you. Housing on Long Island, as we said earlier, is a major, major issue. And it's one that people want to hear about. When we go before the people, they are going to want to know our plans for this problem. And as I said earlier, it should be a number of different angles to tackle this affordable housing problem. How do I speak to people in the middle, the blanks and indies on this? I've been in construction. I've spent my entire life here in Senate District 1. I've rented houses. And I've also been part of a team that developed an award-winning program in Southampton Town for affordable accessory apartments. We won the Long Island Vision Award for that. Also, Fred Thiel's transfer tax. Just the other day, we passed zoning in Hampton Bays for mixed-use apartments. It's great. It's right on Main Street next to the train station. It's going to be fantastic. Of course, it's a 10, 20-year plan when you do these kinds of things. But that kind of redevelopment and infill on our main streets on Long Island, I believe, is the key to promote healthy communities as well as keep our kids here on Long Island. And that is a message that will resonate with the blanks and indies and Republicans and pretty much anyone who has children here on Long Island. We want them to stay here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. So the next category is about education. And we've already heard some comments made about the unequal public education that exists in our district and on all of Long Island. So the question is, would you consider changing the formula for funding public schools to make that funding more equitable across all school districts? And we will start with Nora with this question.
Okay. Yeah, no, there are tremendous disparities, and I would definitely support bills that would, work things on more of a per capita compared to a location. And I know in what you had sent out for some questions, there was a talk of the charter schools. And when I had learned years ago that the charter schools were actually getting, subsidized to the tune of, that or more of what the school districts were getting, I was very much appalled, because a charter school is an option for people. It's not, that's something that they're paying privately, and, if that's their option, that should be separate and apart. And, and if there's funding to be had, it should be minimal at best, and not to be depriving the public school districts from the monies.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora. Valerie, please, you would be next.
So I believe that this is too tied to our zip codes. When we look at Long Island's wealthiest school districts, they outspend the poorest school districts by more than $6,000 per student. And I think that when we put in legislation to try to fill in that gap and create more equity, we need to stand by our word as legislators and make sure that we move forward with legislation that's proposed or legislation that's enacted. For example, when we deal with foundation aid and we look at the inequities, the fact that it was supposed to help fix inequities, but now we're in a position where numerous school districts across the state of New York are owed, millions and some billions of dollars as a result of this. When we look at Riverhead, which is in our district, they receive less than 50% of the actual foundation aid that they're entitled to. So we need to look at the formula for foundation aid as well as make sure that the districts are receiving the money that they are promised.
Okay, thank you. Laura.
Thank you. And that number, you're right, Valerie, that number is $3.4 billion is owed to 400 school districts across New York State. I've had many conversations with representatives from NYSET, and something absolutely has to change. We don't want to reduce the funding that existing districts are getting because that'll put a strain on them. But I have to just caveat that. So with this, that because of coronavirus, New York State, according to Governor Cuomo, New York State is completely broke. So right now, even our budget, the way it is, we're not really sure what that's going to be looking like because it's on a rolling basis, as the governor has made an attempt to try to predict what the revenue will be, but it's very hard when we have literally our economy is shut down right now. But getting back to school districts, we don't want to reduce the districts for what they have now, but we want to elevate those districts that aren't getting their fair share. And we want to make sure that school districts not only have the funding that they need to be able to provide the quality education we know they're entitled to, but also that they have the resources to be able to provide the services that are needed for kids now in school. The kids are needing social workers, psychologists. They need a lot more resources now. And kids that are coming in with little to no family structure, these are kids maybe that they're impoverished and they need food and shelter. And school districts and teachers are starting to become the social workers for these kids. They need those resources. So I would be supportive of adjusting the aid.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Tommy John.
Thank you. Yes, we're actually talking about the equalization rate in New York State. The 725 districts that span New York State get a combination of state monies as well as local support via their budgets. Now, what I've been finding as a town representative and a former school board member and legislative liaison to the school board is that this equalization rate is based on individual municipalities. I think the governor is on the right track when he indicated that we should be looking at different school buildings rather than school districts. Different schools within a school district may or may not get the same funding that they deserve. And I think that is one fix, that individual districts should be rated on their wealth ratio rather than the municipality. For example, all of the school districts in Brookhaven and Southampton and Southold are set by an equalization rate from the town. So that average of the town actually can work for some districts and against others. So yes, we absolutely need to work on the equalization rates. The foundation aid is a problem. The Riverhead School District, so we note, is in the 2nd Assembly District, just for future reference for everyone here. And they do deserve more money, and schools in New York State should be funded equally. Absolutely. So yes, we need to fix that, the equalization rate across the state.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. Okay, Skyler, please.
So I'm really glad this is being brought back up. I did mention earlier that one of the biggest problems we see through the United States is that funding for schools is based on zip code. That doesn't make any sense. It leads to a lot of problems, and it really helps to feed into systemic racism. So if we want to start to fight that, this is where we begin. Now, when it comes to getting the funding, there's a couple key reasons why this is so important. Especially as technology advances, we need to make sure that schools are able to keep up with these advances. We're seeing that right now during this crisis, where schools were forced to close, and for good reason. But all students had to move online. Now students were forced to have a stable internet connection and access to laptops. That's not a reality for a lot of students. I've seen numbers of Facebook posts I've seen a number of Facebook posts and social media callouts from across the island, from across New York, of people who cannot afford a laptop for their child. Meanwhile, we have other schools that do have the resources to provide laptops for every child. We need to make sure that that's not a problem anymore. The other thing that's not talked about a lot in this funding gap is when it comes to lunch programs. A lot of times, students are only able to get a hot lunch or a hot breakfast or both at schools. And what we see in the United States is lunch debt. It is unconscionable to say to students, you cannot get a hot lunch today because you have too much debt on your card. So what I would do, one of the first things I do with this funding is make sure that we wipe out lunch debt and guarantee meals to every student in New York State. The last thing I want to say about this before I run out of time, I'm in favor of marijuana legalization, and I would use the funding for marijuana legalization to feed into our schools. We can really give a boost to education if we use the funding that comes from marijuana legalization. It would give us a huge tax boost. It would give us a huge boost to our economy, and we can reinvest that money in schools because it's an investment in our future. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. And you're going to be the first to respond to the next question, so I just want to give you a heads up on that. We're moving into climate change questions. So as we all know, last session, the state passed the Climate Leadership and Climate Community Protection Act. So the question is, what green energy initiatives can be developed or implemented on Long Island to help realize the goals of this act? And
Great.
We'll start with Skyler.
Great. So climate change is the most present threat of our time. It's not just going to affect our grandchildren or children, it's affecting us right now. And if we don't do something, it's going to become unstoppable. In fact, a lot of scientists are already predicting that we're too late to stop the effects of climate change, that it's now just a matter of trying to figure out how bad it's going to be. So there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, we need to be investing in things like solar power and things like wind power. I do want to mention that my campaign is 100% grassroots funded. We do not take any money from corporations or developers, meaning that I will never be beholden to something like a fossil fuel company. You'll never have to worry that I'm going to fold to corporate interests who want the fossil fuel industry to thrive. I'm on the side of the people, and that's it. I want to make sure that we're putting in place clean initiatives for businesses across New York State, which means holding conferences with businesses throughout the state to make sure they're putting in place sustainable practices. It means by 2035, getting our MTA to be completely carbon neutral. When what I mean by that is that we have states that are starting to invest in their systems by making sure that their buses emit no fumes, that they're electric buses, and we can do that. So it's really important that we begin to do that in New York State. There's almost nothing that's more worth investing in because it is our planet's future. So I want to make sure that we're putting in place new initiatives and that we're building in places that haven't been developed and that are maybe put aside for realtor development. So I want to make sure that we're using that land not for mansions, that we're using the land for wind farms, for solar farms, because that is going to be what's going to affect every one of us across the island. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Tommy John.
Thank you. Green technology is important. I believe it's the future, and I also believe it's an obligation that we as New Yorkers need to do for future generations. As a councilman in Southampton Town, I'm proud to say that we have the lowest Hertz ratings in our construction building development of any town in New York State. The builders hate us, but you know what? We are saving money in electricity. In fact, even though the population of the town has gone up, our energy use has remained flat. We are looking at these things. We are interested in and exploring the development of what's called community choice aggregation. In other words, taking the town away from LIPA and creating our own electrical utility where we can bid for and purchase green energy. So things like that around the state need to be made easier, and it also needs to be made possible for community solar farms. I believe that every house should have solar panels. Every house should have some little windmill on there. And while I'm talking about wind, I wholeheartedly support the development of wind technology out in the ocean. so long as the fishing industry is kept apprised. And I have to say that NYSERDA is doing a good job. I've been in a number of meetings with NYSERDA and the fishing industry about the wind farms, and they're keeping them apprised every step of the way. I support Governor Cuomo's carbon neutral goals, and I truly believe that we do owe this to our future.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. Laura, please.
Thanks, Catherine. Climate change is a real and present threat, and we have to make investments in solutions that will transition us from fossil fuel into renewable, sustainable energy. But you know, I have to also add that we also need to make investments in local universities and in engineering departments so that those universities can develop the technology that we're going to need to be able to transition. I certainly am supportive of the governor's climate leadership and Community Protection Act. It's going to address and mitigate the effects of climate change by cutting greenhouse gases, diverting the state's energy toward replacing, that's my dog is making noises in there, sorry about that. Diverting the state's reliance away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy, creating green jobs and jobs that are going to promote environmental justice. So we absolutely are going to be investing. We already have in offshore wind. And as Tommy John said, we just have to keep the fishing industry folks apprised. Solar farms, absolutely. Also ensuring that commercial buildings and construction are green now and using renewable as much as we can, and also residential homes as well. So, you know, one of the things that the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, what that created was an action council that has to develop a plan, a scoping plan. And as part of the development of the scoping plan, they're going to be having advisory councils, and those advisory councils can have people from our district on those councils to have a voice. So I'm very, very much looking forward to working with professionals on that are out in the industry that are developing new technologies so that we can move toward completely being not dependent upon fossil fuels.
Okay, great. Laura, thank you. Valerie, please.
Well, first, I think that we should be focusing on renewable energy and clean power. We look at what the state has been doing over the past few years, and even in the most recent budget, the New York State Climate Leadership and Protection Act and the Restore Mother Bond Act are all things moving in the right direction. But the states can put forth legislation and put forth goals as much as they'd like, but if we as local municipalities are not stating aggressive goals to either meet what the state is putting forward or surpass that, we're never going to achieve those goals. So I am proud to say that I am the environmental protection liaison for the town of Brookhaven, and I have worked with my colleagues to not only lay out very aggressive goals, but to meet them. So in 2015, we called for a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the end of 2020, and we are looking to have 100% clean energy within the next 10 years or so. We have electric vehicle charging stations at Town Hall. We have installed solar at our landfills and the LED street lighting within the town, as well as across all of the town. Right now, we're projected to result in a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 2020, and we're already seeing a 30% reduction in street light energy consumption. Tommy John Schiavoni spoke to the community choice aggregation. We're doing the same thing within the town of Brookhaven, and we're also working with LIPA or PSE&G to bring forward an energy park. So we are doing everything that we need to do within the town of Brookhaven with over 500,000 residents to meet those goals. And we are actually being more aggressive about it than the many municipalities on Long Island.
Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. Nora, please.
Okay, so one of my other roles, due to my unionism, is being on the e-board for the Long Island Federation of Labor. And that enabled me to have great insight onto the many things that they have been pushing to put into our communities, such as the wind energy, the solar farms, LEDs, recycling, educating people how to use technology to minimize the use of energy in their homes, and for the environment, also trying to help get everybody into a septic system that is not hurting our environment, are all things that we should be looking in. And I agree with Laura too. I think we need to definitely invest in studies of green technology that has yet to be developed to help us in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora. So there's one follow-up question regarding climate change, and we're going to give you 30 seconds to reply because our time is getting short. So Laura, Lever, just for you to be aware of that. And the follow-up question is, where do you stand on the controversy surrounding wind farms in East Hampton? In particular, the concern about the siting of the windmills and the cables where they will be laid to bring the power on land. And we'll start with Tommy John.
The landing is currently scheduled to be in Wainscott, and I know the folks in Wainscott really are not happy about this, and the wind farm folks, that they are looking for alternative sites. I believe that they will find the correct site. There's a couple of different plans and some really, really interesting technology. They're actually going to shoot it from the ocean under the ground and come up several hundred yards into the on the upland side of the beach. I believe we need to do this. I believe that this is a technology that needs to be developed, and it will power most of East Hampton and part of Southampton town. This is our future. So 30 seconds, I support it.
Okay, thank you. Laura, please, you'll be next.
Thanks, Catherine. I also I've read about the issue out there in Wainscott, and also that they are looking for an alternative site. So I am supportive of it, and I would do everything I could to sit down with those folks. But it sounds like they're just not willing to negotiate this. So we need to do it, and I support it.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Valerie.
I think that, most people who believe in renewable energy believe in having wind farms, but there are other components of it that need to be addressed and has to be done in a way that involves community input. So the only way that I see a path to success on this is to involve the community, which should have been done initially. I know that some of the other sites, or at least one of the other sites, is in Montauk. You come across the same problems when you go to a different community, because then they feel like you're jumping it in their backyard. So how it should start off is taking an analysis of 3 or 4 different locations, talking to community, giving them incentive for possibly having the landing in their area. It's something that I've done with respect to electrification that we've been pushing within the town of Brookhaven. I did a land use plan for a Superfund site and made sure that in my plan, I involved community input and created an area for the yard, the train yard, because we knew that that would be one of the impediments. But I had foresight and said, how do I involve the community and make them part of the decision-making process, as well as provide additional incentive, which I did in my land use plan, for the people that would accept, for example, in this instance, the landing area.
Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. And Nora, please, you're next.
Okay, so again, I definitely support the wind energy. But like Valerie said, making the community part of the solution, not part of the problem, involving them and their concerns. And, very often, things can be negotiated, but if the community just feels like it's being done without any say in the matter, of course, there's going to be, people rising up against it.
Great, okay. Thank you, Nora. And Skyler, please.
So I do support this site, and I believe that there was community discussion, especially when they found out it was going to be in Wainscott, and I believe that it was accepted. Of course, there was concern from the people in the area. However, this is too important to be put off at this point. The Hamptons are going to be hit harder than nearly anywhere else by the effects of climate change. When sea levels rise, these mansions, that a lot of the people that are in these mansions that are really upset that this cable is going to be put here, this is who it's going to affect. Those houses are going to be gone. We're seeing climate change in the Hamptons where the shoreline is going to be pushed in. We're going to see people getting really sick. We cannot afford to not do this project. This is no longer a matter of trying to find an alternative site because it's not going to work in the Hamptons. You're going to end up disrupting important pieces of property. So what we need to make sure that we're doing is pushing this plan forward because yes, it will cause a disruption. I will not lie about that. However, it's worth it. It is worth it. It will help too many people to ignore. And I will help to push this plan if it is not passed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. So we're at 8 o'clock. We have a number of other moderated questions, but I think what I'd like to do is ask at least one more moderated question and then see if there are questions from people on Zoom or in Facebook, so we give them an opportunity to weigh in. So the last category for the moment that we'll take moderatedly is about immigration.
Were you back to 90 seconds, Catherine?
Well, back to 90 seconds. Yes, Laura. The state passed a number of good legislations, including green light in the last session. So our question is, what further measures can the state take to protect immigrants, many of whom are on the front lines right now working in this crisis, and to help them as we move out of the crisis and try to provide some stability going forward? And we will start with Laura.
Hi, Catherine. As I mentioned earlier, I run the county's Crime Victim Center and Rape Crisis Center, and we are an organization that provides support services to all victims of violent crime. That means sex crime victims, human trafficking victims, victims of gang violence, all those horrible murders in the Brentwood and CI areas. All those families come through my organization. So individuals that are not documented come through my agency quite often. And these are folks that have been harmed by crime. And we, as an organization, I have about 30 full-time staff, and this is the organization I started 25 years ago from my home. We provide support services, and part of it is to ensure that any expenses related to crime are paid for. So when somebody is not documented, has no coverage, and maybe has a $25,000 or $100,000 hospital bill, we get that paid for. So you don't have to be documented to be able to get reimbursements for your expenses related to crime. So that's something that early on I made sure in my organization that folks that were documented would feel safe and secure that when they came to the agency, they would get the help they needed. And in fact, now that we're all sheltered in, domestic violence has been on an uptick, and we're having to respond to domestic violence. Whether you're documented or not, it doesn't matter. You will get the support services that you deserve and need. What I would like to see statewide is individuals who are not documented, that there be organizations that can have a unit of their larger organization that can specifically address the issues that immigrants are facing, and not only crime, but also employment, because we work with folks who are immigrants and are not documented and they're not getting paid. We also advocate for them with the Human Rights Commission. I myself have actually called an employer who wouldn't pay somebody. It was an outrage. But I would like to see organizations that provide services to all folks, like social services, for them to be able to have a special unit just for individuals that are not documented.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. Valerie. We got to unmute you.
Yep, I unmuted you. So in this particular situation, I think one of the things that Laura mentioned was that during this COVID crisis, there are agencies and the municipalities are helping undocumented immigrants to some degree. The problem becomes, even if that is offered, when you have a level of fear amongst undocumented workers, they're not going to avail themselves of things that are provided to them. When you look at the numbers with respect to COVID, you're looking at how it's impacting certain socioeconomic areas more aggressively than it is in other places. And part of those areas are where there are a lot of undocumented immigrants. Now, if you're an undocumented immigrant, unfortunately now having to continue to work because you're an essential worker, and then you start to feel sick, if you know that you will potentially lose your job as a result of not going to work, you're going to continue to work. Then you don't feel well, you'd say, well, maybe I'll go to the hospital, but people don't want to go to the hospital because one, they may not be able to afford it, they don't have the insurance, or two, they're scared that if I go into this hospital, I might put myself in a situation where I'm risking deportation because of the level of fear that exists. So we need to combat the fear that exists right now before we can properly help our undocumented immigrants. And of course, on a larger level, on a higher level, make sure that there is a proper pathway to citizenship for these undocumented immigrants that are here within our country, that are working, doing the jobs that many of us don't want to do, and that are providing for and contributing to our economy.
Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. Nora, please.
So again, this pandemic is terrible, but I hope in some ways it hits a reset button so that people realize that everyone is a human being, and as such, we should be treated fairly and equally. Also, being with the Long Island Fed, they have Jobs with Justice that works with them, and they do an incredible job, and they really bring to all the trades that come to those meetings, bring to light the areas that we do need to concentrate on. And again, it's been said before, but finding a path to their citizenship here is key. And I was happy that the license happened, because that's just one step where people can actually come and have trusted the system, that there wasn't somebody there waiting to take them away, that they could actually go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and obtain the license. And as well as, please don't discourage anybody. If they need help and they do not have insurance and they are an undocumented person, they actually will get emergency Medicaid. They cannot be turned away. Okay. And the hospital, being a nurse 32 years at the hospital, I've never seen somebody come and take a patient away. Okay. So we're not deporting people at the hospital. The hospital is there to take care of people. And I really wish people, could be educated that they should not fear seeking help for their health.
Okay. Thank you, Nora. And bless all the hospital workers for what they do. And we don't think that the hospital is turning people away. What we do know is that people are afraid to go there because they are afraid of what might happen. So next is Skyler, please.
Great. So there's a couple of key components to this issue. So first of all, when we discuss immigration, I'm really happy to hear that everyone is using the term undocumented immigrant, because no human being is illegal. And unfortunately, that term is used too often. Now, a key part of this issue is education and informing the public. Our esteemed Assemblyman, Anthony Palumbo, who, as you know, is running for this seat, he recently sent out a legislative survey that made it sound as if we had given undocumented immigrants the ability to vote in our elections, which is false. We have Nick LaLota, the Republican Commissioner of Elections, posting on Facebook that undocumented immigrants will now be registering to vote en masse in the DMV. So immigration is largely federal, but that doesn't mean that we can't do anything. I can tell you that, first of all, I will never partner with ICE. I will not be complying with ICE when it comes to these orders. I will not be working with ICE. I will not be doing anything that will get people deported, because we are putting them in harmful situations. Now, I'm really happy that Valerie brought up a path to citizenship, because that is one of the most important things we can do, and it's what we need to begin to do through things like employment, through if they pay taxes, because, by the way, undocumented immigrants in a lot of years pay over $14 billion in taxes to the United States. So we can use that as a way to give them a path to citizenship. citizenship. And I believe this is all important. Now, I like what Nora said about healthcare, and it is true that they will not be turned away at the hospital. However, emergency care is not the same thing as preventative care. That's, again, another reason, going back to New York Health Act, why I support it, because New York Health Act does not say any citizen of New York, it says any resident of New York, which means that them living here, they are provided for under this bill. That means that no undocumented immigrant will ever be turned away at the hospital because they cannot afford the cost of care. It means that they'll never have to be turned away from the dentist office. They'll never feel mildly sick and want to get checked out or want to get an x-ray and be turned away. They'll be able to make sure that they don't have illnesses before the illnesses become chronic, and that's really important. So I want to make sure that I'm protecting immigrants' rights, and these are some key stuff to do it. I'm going to work to make sure that we're starting to halt deportations in New York State, especially when it's people who are trying to make a life here and fleeing things like violence and disaster. And I'm really looking forward to doing that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Tommy John, please.
Comprehensive immigration reform. I'm calling out Congress for failing in their duties to create comprehensive immigration reform. The last time we had it was in the 1980s. And without such reform, it falls on the localities, it falls on the states, it falls on the President of the United States to issue executive orders to deal with this situation. Now, your question dealt with the state, and we're running for state senate, and I agree. The first thing I would do would be to introduce legislation to not allow administrative warrants within the boundaries of the state of New York. I think they are unconstitutional. They really go against who and what we are as Americans with our separation of powers. Councilwoman Cartwright mentioned fear. The ICE deportations and really abductions in our society has created an atmosphere of fear where the undocumented immigrants are really afraid to go to the local government and local authorities and organizations for help and assistance in their communities. It actually is counterproductive for what they say they want to do. So in addition to not having administrative warrants, I would also forbid ICE agents to work in and around courtrooms. What they do and what they're doing with freedom of information and getting names and things is unconstitutional. And I'll end this again with asking Congress for comprehensive immigration reform. Congressman Zeldin, introduce a bill, do it, and then run for election. I believe that Congress has skirted this issue for far too long, and it really shouldn't be up to the town of Southold or any other town to determine what is clearly a federal issue.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. So I actually do have one final question, but I'm going to hold off on that to see if there is a question in the chat. And I know Julie has been keeping an eye on that. Julie, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
There's a question directed to Skyler.
Wait, is there a question directed to all of the candidates?
Only one that I asked, so it's not that important. But
well, perhaps the other candidates can also answer the one that's directed to Skyler. Go ahead. Okay,
so the one directed to Skyler was, first you said you support public education funding and funding for colleges, and the question was a clarification one. All colleges or public colleges?
Okay, great. So when it comes to college, I'm discussing public colleges. I'm specifically referring to schools such as SUNY schools, so that way we can fund our public education and our public college system.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Julie, if you don't see any other, I see that Jeff Vogel has his hand raised. So Jeff, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Okay, so I wanted to follow up on the wealth tax issue, because in New York State, we have progressive income tax where all income for everyone is taxed. I mean, my current taxes are 11% of my income goes to New York State. Now, what kind of wealth tax are people proposing? Because countries that have tried to tax other than income items have been unsuccessful in doing this. So what can a wealth tax be if it's not an income tax?
Okay, thanks for your question. Jeff, we're gonna go to Valerie first, and then we'll go to, and maybe we'll just do for this, Laura, how about if we do 30 seconds? Okay, thank you. Valerie, please.
Okay, I unmuted myself. So when we're talking about wealth tax, what I was referencing was the income tax. That is what I looked at, at least that's how I understood the question. I don't, as I indicated previously, have the legislation in front of me that has been proposed by various state legislators, and I can try to pull that up actually. But there were some viable options that were put forward with respect to wealth tax in the form of an income tax based on, so when we talk about redistribution of wealth, we're talking about it being in the form of an income tax.
Great.
That's what we have now. We have an income tax. People pay a tax based on their income in New York State.
Yes, so increasing the percentage that is given to those that are more wealthy. So the reason without having the legislation in front of me, I can't speak to the various brackets, but increasing the wealthier to redistribute that money back to those that are less wealthy.
Okay, great. Thank you. And would anyone else like to tackle that of the other candidates?
I would if you don't mind.
Okay, well, how about Nora first and then Skyler? Because I saw Nora's hand go up and then I heard your voice. So please, Nora.
Okay, thank you. So I was, in my answer, I was talking about income tax, but we also do need to, I think, address the business taxes. Very often they have tax basically told what they're going to be paying, but there's never any checks and balances on that. So very often a lot of the businesses do not pay their fair share of taxes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Skyler, please.
Jeff, I'm glad you asked this because a lot of times there's a misunderstanding of what the wealth tax is. Like you said, we already have the income tax. What we need to do is impose the wealth tax, which is not a tax on income, it's a tax on a net worth. That's two very different things. So if we put a tax on net worth, that's supplemental to our income tax. The other thing we do need to do when it comes to things like income tax is start to close the tax loopholes. We all know people who are not paying into taxes. We know certain presidents who are not paying into taxes. So if we start to close these loopholes, first of all, that'll help with our income tax, but a wealth tax is separate and is a tax on net worth, not from the income. Thank you.
Thank you, Skyler. And Tommy John or Laura, would either of you like to? I see, okay, you both would. So, okay, Tommy John, then Laura.
0.5% wealth tax on accumulated value. Also, the petit-terre tax as well. And I think it should go toward education.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. Laura, please.
Yeah, it was my understanding that what was being proposed was, as Valerie had indicated, that it was income-based, but it was only for the most wealthy. So, and also it apparently did something with reassessing levies on banks and hedge funds and private equities. But Senator Hoylman, who actually proposed, was the prime sponsor for the Child Victims Act, which gave adult survivors the ability to bring a cause of action. He actually wanted to roll back state sales tax exemptions for luxury yachts and private planes. That was another piece of it.
Okay, great. So I'm seeing, Julie, that there is a consensus that your question is valued and we would like to hear it, please.
Sure. I asked for the candidates, how can engaged people like you and us too campaign? How will you communicate and bring out new voters in a time of coronavirus?
That's a good question. Nora, we're going to start with you.
Well, I have these sandwich boards that I figured I'd just walk up and down every main street I can. But I might just do that if it gets bad. No, on the social networking, Facebook, and there's also something that I've just tied into most recently called the WhatsApp, which is a great discussion group area. And again, word of mouth, getting out, there's nothing wrong with communicating via the phone. That's totally legal. That's plenty more than 6 feet away. Yeah, so I think we're going to be heavily relying on our social media and the old-fashioned telephone call.
Okay, great. Thank you. Skyler?
So a couple of things here. So first of all, my campaign is perfectly situated for digital campaigning. We have an email list of over 50,000 people. I understand social media very well. I went viral twice last week. We're doing very well with digital campaigning, and we're going to be able to continue to do that. I do want to mention with our phone banks have transitioned to not focus primarily on saying, look how great I am. It's now on is there anything we can do to help you? It's the first thing that our volunteers are directed to ask. We have a large group of volunteers that are calling people around the district, and what they are told to ask is, are there any resources that you need? And they're given every resource that we can find, so that way they can connect a person with that. My age really does hook people into the campaign, and it gets people interested. I've seen a lot of young people register to vote for the first time because they were excited that I was running. I actually personally registered a lot of young people as Democrats for the first time, both from parties like Republican, or they were unaffiliated, or they had never voted before. So because of my age, I'm going to be able to get a lot of new volunteers in, especially now that we're all home. I've already had a lot of college students sign up to volunteer, to make calls, and to do any work that they can. So my position on social media, combined with my age and the fact that it hooks people in, will be really beneficial, and I know I'll be able to engage people and be able to get out the vote in June.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Tommy John.
Thank you. This particular time it's difficult. You know, we are in a national crisis, and frankly, for me, I have suspended my campaigning as well as my fundraising, and you know, we're going to see how it goes for the next couple of weeks. You know, as a councilman, we are really focused on the things that we need to be doing for the people of the constituents of our town. I want to see how things go toward the end of April, May. Hopefully, we will be able to get together again. In the meantime, I will maintain my Facebook page and my website and get my issues out that way. We have to focus on our community and our families right now.
Great. Thank you, John.
Frankly, getting food to people. Tomorrow, I'm going to be delivering food to seniors who need critical supplies from stores. And I believe as communities, that's what we should be doing at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy John. Laura.
Thanks,
Please.
Catherine. This is a really challenging time for us. Yesterday marked the first time throughout this pandemic in New York history, it's going to be marked. We experienced the largest increase in deaths from COVID-19, 731. So that brings the total to over 5,400. And in Suffolk County, I think it's close to 230, somewhere around that. So what we're experiencing right now is an enormous human catastrophe. And all of us are feeling suffering. It's fear or anxiety, becoming ill, grief or loss for a loved one, employment. You know, we're shut down, our economy shut down. But first and foremost, I have to say we're standing together. And I have to thank Nora, because she's one of the first line folks that are out there for us. But also some of the essential workers, like my staff. I'm an essential worker. I have to provide services for victims of crime. So we're doing that remotely, orders of protection completely remotely. The sheriff is awesome. I mean, so many people. We're also involved in ensuring people are getting food. Our volunteers are there. So it's a time for us to kind of reflect and just hold off and wait for the right time.
Okay, thank you, Laura, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Valerie, please.
So I'd first like to join Laura in thanking Nora for being on the front line. She's risking her, life every day to take care of all of us. I join in Tommy John in the fact that right now, public health is most important. We are elected officials and we have been elected into office and we have a job to do, and that's to protect our residents to the best way that we can. We have between 70 to 100 elected officials on calls every day, brainstorming as to what can we do to make sure that our municipalities are taking care of the residents the way that they should. We've been advocating as municipalities to the state for changes in some of the policies that have been put forth in this emergency. Everyone is basically shooting from the hip to some degree because we did not expect this, nor were we in any way as a state prepared for this or a country. And we have strong leadership here in the state of New York, and we have municipality elected officials that are working very hard together across party lines on a daily basis to do this, to make sure that we are doing the best we can for our constituency. So campaigning has definitely taken a back seat, but of course, we still understand how important the democratic process is, and quite frankly, some of the reasons, my personal opinion is, some of the reasons we are in the position we're in now is because of some of the elected officials we have in place. So we need to also show people how this COVID pandemic highlights all of the problems within our healthcare system, within our system with respect to living wages, with respect to almost every issue we've touched on today. And that is a way, I think, to connect with voters so they understand that COVID pandemic is highlighting the changes that we need to make here so that way, if anything like this ever happens again, and even if it doesn't, we're in a position to be able to function and have the proper quality of life for all residents, and not just for citizens, and not just for those that are more wealthy.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Valerie. So I see that Catherine Levy has her hand raised if she'd like to ask the next question.
Where is she? Hi. I presume that all of you are aware of the recommendations from the commission that was created to recommend proposals for public financing. Some of us who've been advocating for public financing were very disappointed in the proposals. One, what do you think of the proposals? And two, do you think that this is something that should be handled by a commission, or should it be actually handled by members of the legislature?
Okay, thank you for that question, Catherine. And we're going to go to Nora first, please. Let's see. I'm muting you, Nora.
You hear me?
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Unfortunately, one of the things that Long Island is famous for are people who have gotten into corruption issues, and public campaign financing, I think, will help avoid some of that and steer us into a direction. Sorry, my phone is dying. Let me just replug. I think it would keep us out of the quid pro quo type of positions that campaign financing, other than in a regulated way, would be happening. Very often, people will donate to a campaign and fully expect whatever, issue they have coming up to be supported just because of a payback. And I think, again, that is greed is the root of all evil. And I think we need to put things more on people's merit than on people's ability to charm money out of big donors.
Okay, thank you. Tommy John.
The Campaign Finance Commission really was kind of an interesting commission with what it did. And part of it is, of course, its attack on fusion voting. And I think that's kind of where you were going. I do support campaign financing. I do believe that we need to take public monies, or excuse me, large donor monies out of politics. Unfortunately, it is our system right now, and it unfairly weights one segment of our population over other segments. Having said that, I do support fusion voting. In Suffolk County alone, over 60,000 people voted on third-party lines in the last presidential election. That, to me, is a huge vote of confidence for our third parties. It gives people in philosophical minorities a bit more say in our electoral process. I am proud to have been supported by the Women's Equality Party, by the Working Families Party, also by the Independence Party and the Democratic Party in New York State. And we're one of a few states that actually has this system, and I believe that we should keep it the way it is moving forward. And I believe that the legislature should have voted on this rather than the commission work.
Okay, yeah, that gets to the question. Thank you, Tommy John. Valerie, please, next.
So I'm in full support of public financing. However, I was disappointed, particularly with the component of the recommendations that was attacking the minor party ballot. I am a Working Families Party. I've been endorsed by Working Families Party for this election, and for all of my town council elections, I have been the Working Family Party candidate. I believe that we need to not only engage commissions, because I do believe in commissions, you know, and as an elected official on a local level, I have advocated for a number of advisory committees and commissions to be created because I believe in community input and expert input. But in a situation like this, after the commission provided their recommendations, then I believe that it should have been voted on by the state legislature, most definitely, particularly in an important issue like this. And I'm really hoping that we will be able to get to where we need to be with respect to public financing, because it truly, without it, we have no true democratic process.
Okay, great. Thank you. Skyler, please, you're next.
So Catherine, thank you for asking this question. I actually testified in front of this commission when it was first established. I went to the Suffolk County legislator, I went to the hearing, and I read a statement, and I discussed this. Campaigns like mine, my campaign is grassroots. My family has not poured 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or $50,000 into my campaign. I rely on grassroots donations. Most of my donations are around $25. So a bill like this really would benefit campaigns from people who are not millionaires, from people who are not rich, who are not independently wealthy. It would benefit the people of New York State. Now, I'm not happy, first of all, by the way that it actually ended up. The public financing of elections, it ended up being a problem. There's a number of problems in there. Of course, it tries to kill third parties, which is a major issue. One other thing that I wasn't happy with is that what the bill does is it only matches donations that come from directly within the district, which sounds great on paper, but of course what that allows incumbents to do, and people with a lot of money, is funnel in money from outside the district, while candidates who might have family or friends outside the district cannot get those dollars matched. That creates a huge amount of inequity in there, so I'm looking forward to fighting that. So again, the legislators should have voted on this because commissions are appointed, and that's a huge issue. We know who they're beholden to. And it's creating issues because they're going back for their own interests and not for the interests of the people of New York. I'm fully in favor of public financing of elections, and we need to make changes. It's time to get big money out of politics. I said this earlier. I'm not corporate funded. I come from people, and we need to see more campaigns like that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Laura.
Yes, I am fully in support of public financing, campaign financing. And you know, working regularly with folks who are considered poor or traditionally oppressed, these are individuals that need to have a voice just as much as a corporate donor does. So, and so many of you have already made these points, but we do have to take big money out of politics, because it is the folks that are not represented that need to be represented. They need a voice, and who better to raise the volume than individuals who are have grassroots campaigns. So I mean, Skyler has some really good points, and he's getting funds $25 at a time, and I have a lot of respect for that. And I think that public financing of campaigns is going to equal the playing field, and that's what the democratic process is about. So I'm fully supportive of it, and also it should have been voted on by the legislature.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to ask Tina right now if she sees any questions on Facebook that should be put forward. You're muted.
I have one that's for everybody and a few that are for particular people. So I'll ask the everybody one. This is from Dom Pasquale, And he asks, what is everyone's plan to close the estimated $15 billion New York State budget gap due to increased COVID-19 and the revenue shortfall from the economic impact of COVID-19?
Okay, that's a good question, and we're going to go to Tommy John to answer first, reply first.
I hope it stays at $15 billion with the way our economy is going right now in New York State. The lost revenue that we are experiencing in this state is going to be absolutely staggering. You know, a budget gap can only be filled one of three ways, and they're all kind of related. Either you cut services, you raise taxes, or you do a combination of both, or you get bailed out by the federal government. And what we're going to need to do, hopefully that the federal government will come in and help us in this area. But really, we may have to run a deficit for a number of years to get out of this moving forward. You know, this is going to be bad, and I don't think I have to tell anyone that. And we are going to have to make some hard decisions as a state moving forward. And I would like to take a closer look at the budget. If you're asking me, like, what would be cut in New York State, all the programs are important, and $15 billion is a very large number, and we're going to have to work on this. There's going to have to be, I believe, as someone who has balanced budget, who has a current AAA rating in the town of Southampton, who with the Sag Harbor School Board moved our financial rating from a AA to a AA plus, that proper financing over time is imperative to move a municipality forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy John. Valerie, please.
First, I believe in making sure that encouraging or making sure that our federal system actually comes out and bails us out to some degree. I may not be, everyone may not be in agreement with me, but I do believe that Governor Cuomo should have taken the stimulus money and then dealt with the Medicaid reform afterwards, because that would have helped to close that gap to some degree. In addition, I think it's important that we look at additional revenue streams. We didn't talk today about marijuana, legalization of marijuana, but that is, a additional revenue stream that should be looked into. Some of it should be allocated towards specific areas, of course, but that is an additional form of revenue. And I think that we should also be looking at ways to eliminate waste. And I say that being a local elected official, it's important that you look at the programs that you're funding and the things that you're doing and see how you can cut back on fraud and waste and see how that could potentially help to save you money as well. So those are some of the ways that I think that we would be able to start to close that gap. But I'm hoping, just like Tommy John indicated, that it's 15 as opposed to anything else. Right. Nothing more than that.
Thank you, Valerie. Laura.
So we have to be a little pragmatic here. The governor said multiple times, every state has been decimated. Every state budget has been decimated that has been impacted by COVID-19, especially like ours. Our budget has collapsed, he reported, because we have no revenue. We shut down the economy. People aren't working. People aren't paying income taxes. So we have to restart our economy. But restarting our economy can't happen until after we have a plan of how to get people back to work, right? So lives, systems, and the economy have to be restarted. So the governor has taken a tri-state approach to this. So he has New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. They're going to work together to get us antibody tested and also to get the COVID rapid testing done so we could go back to work. But the budget is on a rolling basis right now, and there's no guarantees for anybody.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Skyler.
Great. So I like the ideas that have been discussed. However, I do want to mention, Tommy John, you did say that there were only a few ways to balance the budget here, and I can't agree with you there because you discussed cutting programs. as opposed you discuss cutting programs to help balance the budget, and that's really not what's important here. The programs that we've been discussing throughout the night are actually going to affect New York economically, and they're going to be some of the biggest indicators for the economy in the future. We want to talk about New York Health Act. New York Health Act is designed to save people money. That money gets reinvested in New York State. We talk about marijuana legalization. The revenue that comes from marijuana legalization goes back to the state. So we shouldn't be worrying about cutting programs. We should be worrying about enacting new programs to make sure that we have ways to make up for this revenue. And I really want to make sure that that's discussed. So we're of course all worried about the budget. However, I'm more worried about the people of New York State. And if we cut programs, we will decimate lives. So if you want to talk about balancing the budget, that's not what we should be putting as our priority going up to Albany. It should be making sure that the people of New York are state. A balanced budget does no good if people are dying. So I'm going to make sure that we're passing programs that are going to bring money into New York State, not cutting them and ruining lives. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Nora.
Okay. So no, I definitely think we need to look to the federal government to, again, New York proportionally seems to be hit pretty much the hardest of all of our states currently, subject to change. But I definitely think we need to move to looking to have the federal government help get us back in line. And again, I think it's going to be a slow reinfusion of our economy. And, it's going to be something that we're going to have to be, observing and trying to strategize month to month, because this is something that really has not happened in any of our lives to this extent with the economy and with the illness at hand. So as I think we need to take it one day at a time, and again, look to try to bring everything back to reinfuse it slowly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora. Tina, I think that for the questions that go to individual candidates, we're going to hold off on those, and maybe we can get those candidates, those questions, and have them answered in the Facebook feed later on. It's later than we had hoped to go. I do have one final question with the a minute answer from each would be great. Notwithstanding the truly marvelous job, in my opinion, that Andrew Cuomo has done dealing with the COVID crisis, we have to look beyond the crisis to recognize and to have hope that we do get to that point. And so with that in mind, the Long Island Senators in the last session became an informal IDC, voting as a bloc to stop some of the progressive legislation that we wanted to see passed. So our question to the candidates is, how independent of the governor rather, will you be as our representative in Senate District 1? And we can start with Valerie.
I think I've proven myself over the past 7 years to be an independent elected official. I vote for what I stand for, and many times when there are situations where I know that I stand apart from the rest, I take that opportunity to actually try to convince my colleagues, not to send it to my colleagues, to talk to them and explain to them why it's important to look at it from a different perspective. So there will be situations that I will be voting apart. I don't tend to be voting as a bloc. I can't speak to why they voted on as a bloc on some of those very key issues that affect our residents. And I'm not going to pontificate over that. But what I can say is that when I'm an elected official, when I win this race, when I am your next state senator, I will make sure to represent my community to the best of my ability and work and be the voice of the community and not the voice of a voting bloc.
Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. Nora.
Thank you. So I guess nobody's seen any of my tweets for the governor, huh? Again, I wanted to become a senator or a person who could make change for our citizens here in New York and on Long Island. I wanted to bring a voice of healthcare to the table. the governor was making his announcements every day, and he was telling the community what to do, but he was allowing the CDC and the Department of Health to make those the intervals for return to work and the interval to be out of work, 7 days instead of 14 days. And he was bringing sick people back into work, allowing that to happen. And, and basically via tweets, I had told him that the CDC is wrong as far as what our personal protection should be, that we need to have more personal protection equipment, and that he needs to treat us like we're community members. We were also not allowed to get tested as healthcare professionals 3 weeks ago. We were told we couldn't because we were just going to get the virus anyway. And I was very vocal on my tweets, and it seems as though he listened to a lot of them, and slowly but surely the tides are turning, and they're doing the right thing by the healthcare professionals who are trying to save the people.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora. Thank you for shedding that light on the situation. We did not know about that, and bless you for the work that you and every nurse and healthcare professional does every day during this crisis, and beyond that and before that. Thank you. So let's hear from Skyler next, please.
Great. So I have no issue, first of all, separating myself from Cuomo, and I have been vocal in criticism of his when I felt that he has done something wrong. I do not agree with him on key issues, one of those being the New York Health Act. We were discussing the IDC, and now, of course, we're talking about the Long Island 6, and while they're largely voting to block our progressive legislation, and I can tell you that largely comes from lobbyists. Two of the members of the Long Island 6, after voting to block New York Health Act, admitted that their responses to the bill were written with the aid of lobbyists. So that's part of the issue. A lot of times these voting blocks will form because of where they're getting their money from. So I'm grassroots funded. You're not going to have to worry about me being lobbied for that. I'm not taking money from these people. So that's something that I do want to recognize. Now, when it comes to other issues, when it comes to, of course, partisan lines, while I want to make sure that we're voting in the best interest of New York, if I see something wrong, especially if I see Governor Cuomo doing something that I do not believe is in the best interest of New York State, I have no problem separating myself from them. We know that Governor Cuomo is not in favor of New York health, so that is part of the problem when it comes to the Long Island 6 and the IDC, that he can kind of impose the will there. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not party to that I will not have my will changed because of the governor. I'm an independent person, and I will fight as an independent person in Albany. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Skyler. Just as a clarification, are you saying that Jim Gorin said that the healthcare lobby wrote his responses?
I believe it was Jim Gorin, and I want to make sure that I double check this, but from what I read, after Gorin rejected New York Health, the response that was written, he actually said later that it was written in collaboration with healthcare lobbyists.
Okay, I hadn't seen that. Okay. Okay, Laura, please, next.
Thank you. Yes, I have a demonstrated history of independence with our governors. Quite a history going back to Pataki, Spitzer, Patterson, and now Governor Cuomo. And he and I have had spirited differences that were public. And in the end, when you're an advocate, you have to do everything you can to work within the system to bring stakeholders to the table. But when somebody doesn't want to come to the table and refuses, you have to do what you have to do. So I've had great successes in doing that and helped to move tremendous amount of legislation in my career. So I'm definitely very independent. And, that demonstrated history, though, includes working very closely with folks on every side. So working with the group that you're with and working with individuals on the other side. But that doesn't mean that you have to vote in a block every single time. So I'm not a person who feels that I have to do that because I am so independent. And I think honestly here, what we're dealing with now is a huge change of what's going to happen in New York State because of COVID. And I think that the governor needs to focus attention now, going forward, on making sure that we have a pandemic plan. And that plan includes testing right away and contact tracing like South Korea, who flattened their curve when they did that. We still can't get tests out to Peconic Landing, to our most vulnerable elderly, where 9 folks have died and we can't even get tests out there.
Thank you, Laura. I know it's unconscionable. So, Tommy John, you last one for this question.
Thank you, Catherine. As far as Governor Cuomo goes, in this particular instance, he is doing a fine job, and he really has become a national leader. And I'm proud that New York is taking a leadership stand in COVID-19, and he is providing that. Having said that, I am no fan of a lot of the things that the governor has or has not done. And it's really important as a legislator that you speak your own mind. Now, it's important as well that we create the Long Island 7 rather than the Long Island 6, because in Albany, as everybody here knows, or they have recently learned, or they will know, it's really all about various voting blocks. It's New York City, it's Long Island, and it's upstate. And we need to have a critical mass of senators in the Senate from Long Island to get the things that we need done, the things that we discussed tonight, and to get the services from Albany down to Long Island that we need. And that is going to take a degree of working together with colleagues throughout the state. And you know what? Sometimes the governor and sometimes not. But I want to thank everyone for being here, and Pierre as well for doing this. I don't know if this is the last question or not, but I wanted to get that in.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Tommy John. So that was the last question. I want to thank all the candidates for your time. It's 2.5 hours. We really appreciate it. Yeah, yay. We'll unmute everybody so we can clap for them if you so desire to. But I'd just like to say that, you know, we have really 5 wonderful candidates, and I appreciate your discussion on the issues. I want to give you each 30 seconds. This was unscripted, but because you have spent so much time, we'll give you just 30 seconds to sum up who you are and why you should represent us in Albany. And first I'm gonna mute everybody, so you'll have to unmute yourself individually, and we'll start with Tommy John.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Pierre, and everybody who tuned in tonight. This is an important election. This is an open seat. These do not come around very often. And the first Senate district is a very, very conservative district. We have had a Republican in this seat for many years. I am a lifelong resident of the first Senate district. My parents came from here. We're raising our children here. I'm public school educated. And having worked my entire life, adult life, in Brookhaven town, it really gave me a longitude, it gave me a geographic view of the entire district. So, you know, am I done? Is that it?
That was the 30 seconds.
Thank you all again. All right.
Thank you, Tommy John. Okay, Skyler, you're next, please.
Great, I really appreciate it. So we have a lot to do in New York State, and something that unfortunately we hear in these races is people saying, well, I'm the best candidate, so you should vote for me. That's not for us to decide. I'm hoping that everyone here will be able to listen to the policies of the people and decide where to go from there. My campaign has wholeheartedly supported New York Health Act. We have comprehensive policies on nearly every issue, and I believe that's what's important. We just released another extremely comprehensive policy to fight for disability rights. We have plans for women's rights. We have plans for nearly every issue to make sure that everyone is represented. If you elect me, I will be fighting on a policy basis. You know what I'm going to be fighting for. Hope you'll join me at skylerforsenate.com. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Skyler. And I actually, if all the candidates want to put their website in the chat, you're welcome to do that, so people can see that. And we will go to Nora next, please.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for this opportunity. So I'm a daughter, I'm a mother of 4, I'm a grandmother of 7. As I said, nurse for 32 years at Stony Brook, professor for 20 years, president-elect of the Professional Nursing Association of Suffolk County, choir member at my church. Again, my top goals were for coming into trying to be a senator for Long Island is bringing a voice of healthcare to the table, supporting the middle class and the underserved, and passing laws that serve the community. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nora. And Laura, please.
Mute. Thanks, Catherine. So most of you folks know where I stand on issues, and you have the completed questionnaire. and it's all over my website. But something really important to remember is that Anthony Palumbo is a worthy adversary, and you're going to need somebody who, like me, can beat somebody like him. You have a third, and a third as your split, and I can persuade the indies and the blanks because of my work in the community. I'm very high profile, I'm very well known. I'm a social worker and an attorney. I have endorsements from presiding officer Rob Calarco in the legislature, by Kara Hahn, by Local 25, CWA District 1, Local 1108, the iron workers, all 4 of them. I have a lot of support in the community, and I outraised every candidate. I'm a great fundraiser. You know why? Because for 25 years, I have run a not-for-profit, and I started that not-for-profit with my 2 children on my knees and on my legs when they were children. So with literally a computer and a dot matrix printer. So I'm an advocate. I'm a tried and true advocate. I have 25 years of advocacy experience delivering results, reducing sex offender recidivism in the county, reducing domestic violence arrests, educating over 200,000 children. I have a 20-year track record legislatively as well. I can beat Anthony Palumbo.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura. And Valerie, you will wrap it up and bring us home.
Wrapping it up. Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. I want to thank everyone for taking this time to sit with us. I believe that I am the best candidate to win this election, not only the primary, but also the general election. I have proven that I can receive support across party lines. I'm an elected official. I understand the intricacy of legislating, working across party lines, bringing various stakeholders to address hard issues that affect our everyday lives. I'm a mother. I'm a wife living in this Port Jefferson Station community. I have decades of advocacy with over 15 years of it, of serving as a civil rights attorney. I'm an individual who suffered my own share of adversity and obstacles, all of which, thanks to God, I have overcome. And I'm a real candidate who has overcome real life issues, and I'm passionate and effective in advocating for all of my constituents. So I want to say thank you again for giving us this opportunity, and I'm truly hoping that I can count on your support as we move forward with this state senatorial election.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you all. And I just want to let those who are watching both on Facebook and here that each candidate has completed Peer's questionnaire. We have sent that to everyone who is on Peer's list, which are over 600 individuals, and we will be posting that on Peer's Facebook page tomorrow. So you can look there to read in detail what they have said about the different issues we asked them in our questionnaire. So again, thank you all, everyone, stay healthy, be safe, be centered, and reach out to the people in our communities who are vulnerable and need our help now. Please be generous to them. And everybody, just have a good night. And thank you for your time and your dedication to our democracy and our Senate District number 1.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks,
For
Catherine.
meeting us.
Catherine.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Everyone, stay safe.
Bye.
Let me just-
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, Catherine.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Upper right.